This is a computer. Don't believe me? This is the Mac Mini. This is going to be in the same product category as your iMac and your MacBooks. This is going to be running Mac OS. Don't believe me? I didn't believe it when I saw this either. I couldn't believe this was a computer. The only thing about the Mac Mini is that it is BYOB. Bring your own bottle. No, I'm kidding, but it is BYOP. It's bring your own peripherals. So you do have to supply your own monitor, keyboard, and mouse. But if you already have a display, keyboard, and mouse, then this is the most cost-effective way to get introduced into the Mac ecosystem. Today, we're going to take a really in-depth look and do several tests on the Mac Mini to compare it to the MacBook Pro to see how it really holds up. This comes in at $800. So what I want to figure out is if this is a viable option for someone looking for a new computer. So without wasting any more of your time, let's jump right into the review.
It's the kind of beat to go.
So guys, I'm really excited about this one. I've never owned a Mac Mini, so I am just so anxious to get this one open and see just how powerful it is. I have seen a lot of the benchmarks, and actually, this tiny little machine is besting a lot of your iMacs, you know, your 21-inch iMac, the MacBooks, the MacBook Airs. They really did a number on this one, and I'm super glad that they finally got around to updating it after 4 whole years. So, on the front, we're gonna have a profile of the Mac Mini. Here on the side, Mac Mini branding. Nothing on that side. Mac Mini branding on the top as well, and nothing on this side. And on the back, we're gonna get a lot of our regulatory information. So this one is the slightly spec'd up version. This isn't your $799 version. This is gonna be your $999 version. Gonna give you a 3.0 gigahertz 6-core i5 processor, 8 gigabytes of DDR4, which you can now upgrade. iFixit actually has some upgrade kits, so you should definitely check that out if you want to get more RAM. 256 gigs of SSD, and this is going to have the UHD graphics 630 along with all of our beautiful IO, all of our ports. So let's get our trusty guitar pick, which is going to help us open this Mac Mini. Now this is neat. I've never seen this from Apple. It's just kind of wow. This looks really good in the space gray, and it is important to note that this is now only going to come in the space gray color. So we have our classic tab here to just get it out. Wow, this is very thin, very lightweight for what it is. I mean, this is a computer after all, and it's actually quite lightweight. So let's set that off to the side for right now and see what we get included. Here we're going to have our packet designed by Apple in California. Let's go ahead and see and what's inside. Oop, almost missed the stickers. There they go, baby. Here they are. Can't miss those. We are going to be presented with our regulatory and warranty information, and something really interesting about this. Take a look at that. This is a display. So I'm not sure if this is just a little Easter egg by Apple, but if this is hinting at an Apple design display, maybe for 2019, yo, that would be lit. And let's see what else we get inside here. Looks like we get this other additional packet here, and looks like this is just going to be our power cord. There it is, snapped just right out. So let's set that off to the side and really showcase what we really came here for. Yes, sir. We came here for the Mac Mini 2018 finally revised. So let's go ahead and take off this plastic. Man, look at that. It's really stunning to look at. Even though it's just a square of aluminum, I don't know who it is at Apple or what it is about them, but man, just so elegantly designed. It is really gonna feel really good, very cold. It's that cold metal feeling. So we are gonna have our huge Apple logo right there. Here on the side, we're not going to have much, but we are going to have our power switch indicators. On the side, we're not going to have anything. Now, on the back, we're going to have this tape back here, and it's going to protect our precious I/O. So speaking of the I/O, let's go ahead and take a look. So we're gonna have our power button right there. This is gonna be where the power adapter is actually gonna go on to power the Mac Mini. Here we're gonna have a gigabit port. So that's gonna be if you wanna do a wired connection instead of Wi-Fi. 4 Thunderbolt ports. That is insane. I love seeing that. This I/O is really up to par. I'm surprised, honestly. 4 Thunderbolt 3 points is amazing. Down here is just going to be some ventilation, and you can actually see kind of going down into the vents there, so that's just going to be ventilation. An HDMI port, so maybe there are other displays that you may want to connect to this that connect via HDMI, so we do have that. And we are going to have our USB 2.0 ports there, so in case you have any peripherals like a keyboard that uses that USB connection, you have that. And very oddly enough, we do have our headphone jack. Oh, and on the bottom we are going to have Mac Mini branding, and now this is going to be elevated slightly. That's so that the Mac Mini can breathe. So it's elevated slightly on your table so that if it were to get hot or overheat, it kind of has that little space here on the bottom to expel some of that hot air. So I think with this product, it is essential to understand a bit of the history of it before diving into who this product is really for. The original Mac Mini was first debuted in January of 2005, almost 14 years ago. When Steve Jobs first introduced the Mac Mini, people were blown away by its compact size, but most importantly, its price. Starting in at $499, it was the most inexpensive way to get Windows customers to see the light and switch over to the Apple and the Mac OS platform. At this time, many people already had a display, mouse, and keyboard, so it was a no-brainer to buy the Mac Mini, as even then, some could argue Mac OS was a superior operating system. It seemed so simple, but it worked. The Mac Mini was extremely popular and got many people to switch over, some who were still loyal to the Apple ecosystem to this day. Fast forward to 2018 and we start to see a problem. First, it's extremely noteworthy to mention that this is the first revision to the Mac Mini since 2014. There were rampant speculations and rumors that Apple was going to discontinue this product line, but surprisingly, they didn't. They shocked us all, and again, surprisingly made a stellar upgrade. That's not where the problem is. The problem is the starting price. This Mac Mini now starts off at $800. In a growing age of smartphones, we seem to find less and less households with extra monitors, keyboards, and mouses. Whatever, you know what I mean. Apple executive Phil Schiller explicitly told us the reason some of these products have come to light is because all of these products are competing to win you, the consumer, over and make your life much easier. This is precisely what is wrong with the Mac Mini. Fewer and fewer people are out shopping for desktops, and much less have the mandatory accessories you must provide yourself, since for most people their smartphone does everything they ever need in terms of productivity and consuming media. So when the Mac Mini comes in at $800 minus purchasing a display or keyboard or mouse, we now have a fairly expensive, quote, entry-level product. Once you tack on the accessories, according to Apple's philosophy, you can get yourself a MacBook laptop, which in theory is set to replace your desktops. Now, of course, this is generalizing the majority of people. I understand there is a niche for the Mac Mini and it has its market, and there are thousands, if not millions, of people still wanting to get their hands on their first Mac device, but they just don't know which to choose. So with all that being said, let's look at our configurations. This new 2018 Mac Mini is leagues ahead of its predecessor, the 2014 Mac Mini. There's no doubt this is a worthy upgrade if you have a 2014 or older Mac Mini. Our base configuration is a 3.6 GHz quad-core 8th gen i3 processor packed with 8 GB of DDR4 memory. Additionally, we get 128 GB of SSD, lame, I know, and Intel UHD 630 graphics. I'll touch up on the graphics later as it is a deal breaker for me. Now hear me out, $800 is a lot of money. You're getting a standard configuration that, depending on who you ask, will tell you is either a total ripoff or decently priced, but few will say this is a bargain. The specs are mediocre at best for $800, and Apple once again ain't catching up with the trend and is still offering 128 GB of storage on a desktop. It is assumed the desktop is where you will back up most of your media, including photos, videos, and your files. You can, however, spec this machine out if you belong to the 1% and have so much cash laying around, might as well bury it and follow in Pablo Escobar's footsteps. So check this out. If it were up to me, I'd upgrade either the RAM or storage, just depending on on your workload, but definitely don't be dumb and fork over $1,400 extra for 2 terabytes of SSD for real. Maybe go with 256 gigs or 512 if you really need it, but Apple is seriously just price gouging hard with these insane prices. Let's put this Mac Mini to work and stress test it to see the actual performance of the chipset and see how it compares to a MacBook Pro. Alright, so you already know what we're going to start with. Your most basic and standard test. We're going to look at the Geekbench scores of both the Mac Mini and the MacBook Pro. Just kind of compare it to the MacBook lineup. Comparing it to a laptop is going to give us a lot of indication on which to pick up. Now later, I'm also going to test the graphics card on both of these computers, and you'll be surprised at the outcome. Do you think the laptop is going to have the better GPU, or do you think the Mac Mini, the actual quote desktop computer, is going to have the better graphics? We'll find out later. For now, let's go ahead and run the Geekbench to see what the single core and multi-core scores look on both of these devices. Alright, so the results are in. Now, also do keep in mind that this Mac Mini is the slightly beefed up version. It's the i5 6-core processor, and this MacBook Pro is also slightly beefed up as well with higher SSD and a better chip. Now, take a look at your single core scores. We're going to have 5243 on the MacBook Pro and 5143 on the Mac Mini. And keep in mind the price differences between these two. The Mac Mini is going to come in at about $1,000, whereas this machine here, the MacBook Pro, is going to come in at about $2,600. And look at the comparison between those two Geekbench scores. Very, very similar. The MacBook Pro barely wins in both categories, but just slightly. Look at the difference between those single core scores. They're neck and neck. Now on the multi side, we do see bigger differences, but still it's very impressive on the Mac Mini, coming in at close to 20,000 and 23,000 on the MacBook Pro. The next test that I wanted to run was a Cinebench test. So that is also going to test the CPU and also just test the overall health of your computer and also tell you how powerful it is. So let me go ahead and pull that up. Now this next test is very interesting. So the Cinebench test is going to really put a strain on the processor. And what I did on both of these devices is I went ahead and got the Intel Power Gadget widget, which is going to help us look at the frequency, temperature, and overall power of the chipset and check to see whether it's thermal throttling and also to look at the temperature. In particular, I want us to focus on the frequency and the temperature just to see if this is going to thermal throttle at all. So let's go ahead and run the OpenGL on the Mac Mini and also on the MacBook Pro at the same time. So already by launching the OpenGL test, we already see a huge spike in power consumption as well as your chipset. It's already going to about 3.97 here, and on the MacBook Pro it's 2.48. So you can really see the strain that is putting on the chipset. Notice the temperatures as well. We're at about 57 Celsius over here and 54 Celsius over here on the Mac Mini. So let's let this run for a little bit and we'll just take a close look at that temperature and the frequency of the chipset. So the MacBook Pro did come in at 94.53 frames per second compared to 38.67 frames per second on the Mac Mini. That is atrocious. That means this MacBook Pro is about 3 times better when it comes to the OpenGL score. Now, of course, this isn't an all 100% test. Of course, there's some slight variation, but let's continue with the CPU test and also take into consideration how hot these machines are getting and also looking at the frequency of the chipset to see if it's thermal throttling. So the Mac Mini right now again had a huge spike up there. When the test finishes, where you'll see that little dip there, as well as over here on the MacBook Pro, and it suddenly jumped right up, and it makes sense because we're putting some strain using these CPU tests. Look at the temperature over there on the Mac Mini. It's going in at about 100 degrees Celsius, and at any second now is going to thermal throttle, and that frequency is definitely bound to drop. There it goes to 97 degrees, 96. Let's see how the MacBook Pro is doing. 98 degrees Celsius as well. You can see some thermal throttling right there as well. So it's obvious that these machines are pretty well optimized, But when it comes to thermal throttling, there definitely is some, especially if you were to get more of the entry-level models. Again, these are hot, slightly beefed up models of the entry-level MacBook Pro and Mac Mini. Let's look at our results. We have 1018 on the CPU and 907 over here on the Mac Mini. So as we can see, the MacBook Pro is definitely going to best the Mac Mini in both of these categories, as well as let's take a look at just our Intel Power Gadget there comparing the two. Both of them have very similar trends. After the test, the MacBook Pro is running at about 50 degrees Celsius, whereas the Mac Mini is coming in at about 43 degrees Celsius. So make your own conclusions there about the thermal throttling. So the last test I want to look at is the Heaven benchmark test. So this is really going to show us a good indication of how good the graphics chip is in both of our machines. Now the Mac Mini does not have its own dedicated graphics chip like it does in the MacBook Pro. As a matter of fact, it's integrated into the CPU. So with that being said, we're going to put our quality up to Ultra, which is the highest it can go to, and let's just look at these. At the end of the test, it'll tell us how many frames per second it was able to use the benchmark at. Now this is really interesting. Here is where you'll see how bad the Mac Mini really is. Just look at how choppy the Mac Mini is. Now keep in mind, this machine cost $1,000. Now the MacBook Pro is looking as smooth as it can. Obviously, it's not going to be 60 frames per second, but just look at the differences between the Mac Mini and the MacBook Pro. The Mac Mini is god awful. Don't even consider playing Fortnite. Don't even consider doing any type of 4K video editing, especially not 4K 60 frames per second editing. It is going to look like this, and your Mac Mini is just going to crash and burn. I'm going to fast forward this a little bit. This is a longer test, and at the end, we'll just take a look at the results. So just a quick update over here at the corner, what we're looking at is about roughly an average of 30 frames per second on the MacBook Pro, and we're getting a measly 5 frames per second on the Mac Mini. Additionally, what we see here, the CPU proximity temperature is looking about 67 degrees Celsius on the MacBook Pro and 45 degrees Celsius on the Mac Mini. So it is running much cooler on the Mac Mini, but god, those frames per second are god awful. All right. So we're looking at some very disappointing benchmarks off of the Mac Mini. I am just utterly destroyed on how bad the graphics are on the Mac Mini. So let's just compare. So the average on the MacBook Pro is going to be about 31.7 frames per second. It's decent, okay? It's not going to be your 60 frames or anything higher than that. 31 looks smooth enough for the average person. The overall score is going to be 799 with minimum frames per second dropping down all the way to 10 at one point and going actually to 60 frames per second on the MacBook Pro. The Mac Mini, on the other hand, is a different story. Average frames per second is only 5.2 frames per second with a dismal score of 131. Minimum frames per second was 3.6, and the poor Mac Mini tried its best, maxing out at 10.3 frames per second. So with the Mac Mini dipped to its lowest, the Mac Mini reached its highest. I know. So hopefully this gives you a better understanding of each device and how it's going to perform. So as we can see, multi-core and single core, your Mac Mini will be able to perform your basic tasks. But forget about photo editing, forget about video editing, and God, please don't even think about playing video games on your Mac Mini. Now that we gauged at the inner workings of the Mac Mini, let's take a moment to also look at the Mac Mini chassis. So the dimensions remain the same on the Mac Mini, so it's perfect for those Mac Mini server rooms with hundreds of the Mac Minis, as replacing and upgrading them will be extremely easy. Honestly, Apple did get one thing right on this Mac Mini, and that's with the I/O. In terms of I/O, you are 1000% set, and I think this is an important factor to consider when picking up this desktop, since you probably won't need any adapters. On the last note, I did want to talk about a slight issue / controversy behind the Mac Mini, and that is its thermal throttling. Thermal throttling happens when the clock speed of your chipset has to slow down in order to preserve and protect the internal components from getting too hot. Thus, the fans inside your machine will crank up to cool everything down. Under really heavy tasks, it seems the fan on the Mac Mini cranks up to 5,000 revolutions per minute, about as fast as my engine runs when Boo tells me no one home. The Mac Mini overheating sure is a letdown, as internally it did so many things right to set it apart from its predecessor and makes it a viable option in the 2018 MacBook lineup. While the majority of consumers won't care or possibly ever reach thermal throttling conditions, it is important for content creators alike who are needing to rely on a powerful desktop to get them through their daily activities. So who is this machine really for? That's a real good question, my dude, because if you ask me, I personally would not go to the Mac Mini as a first choice. The fact that the Mac Mini doesn't have a dedicated GPU, the graphic chips is essentially built into the processor, makes rendering 4K videos drastically bad. You can always purchase an eGPU to get better graphics from the Mac Mini, but why bother? At that point, you're paying so much money you could travel the world and potentially meet the love of your life in some foreign country for that kind of money. Although it has some of the highest Geekbench scores in relation to Apple's current Mac lineup, especially considering its price, however, you do have to factor in the cost of a keyboard, mouse, and display. Might as well call it BYOB, since you're gonna want that bottle next to you crying over how much money you just blew, for real. In all, if you already have a display, keyboard, and mouse, pick it up, no doubt. For what it's worth, I think it's a good deal. You get impressive single and multi-core scores, and if graphics isn't important to you, then absolutely go out and get it. Many people would disagree with me, but I still think this is a great buy for people who are interested in Apple's walled garden and want to dive deeper into the Apple ecosystem despite the price hike. I wouldn't say this product is a necessary buy, like this isn't revolutionary, nor is it one of a kind piece of tech. It is a solid computer at best, but what do you think? Would you consider picking up the Mac Mini? Let me know in the comment section below. Quick update, in my next video I'll be giving away an amazing prize before Christmas, so definitely stay tuned and subscribe to the channel if you want a chance at winning something extremely cool. Stay tuned and I'll catch everyone in my next video. Peace.